Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. One of the complicated things about being a shamanic practitioner in the modern era is that there's a need to trade my time and talent for this money thing. There isn't the arrangement that we would have had in traditional times where I provided these services to the tribe and was accountable for their spiritual well-being and available, but they made me dinner and brought me blankets and helped me carry my stuff when need be. And that exchange worked out in a really different way. And in the modern era, as we come into being our own spiritual experts, it's still fine if you want to have a spiritual intermediary. That's a tried and true system. And, if you find that it feels good to be in a church with a pastor or really have someone who's holding you in that way, there's a lot of beauty to that. And there are certainly people who offer that. But what I'm offering is this a la carte experience of being basically an expert that is hired to show up for you and do a particular thing rather than holding a container for you. So you don't have ongoing accountability to make sure I'm well in the world, nor do I have ongoing accountability if I work with you. And it's just a different configuration, which is obvious to a lot of people, but kind of worth teasing out. So one of the areas of complexity that comes up is the part where if you're really in struggle in life, if you're having a really hard time, if you had a trauma history, if you survived some really terrible things, discretionary money isn't necessarily flowing as well. And so being able to get the help and the support that you would most desire may involve some fancy tap dancing, with your budget, or what you would prefer may just not be attainable at a certain time. And one of the reasons that I do this podcast is that I can't afford and be able to pay my rent and have the sort of circumstances that put me in a good place to be good at my work. If I were compromising and having roommates I didn't much care for economic needs and was working with that, I wouldn't have as much spaciousness and presence to offer to my work. So it's good for me to be able to afford not to have roommates I don't want to have, for example. And at the same time, that means that there's a amount of money that I need to charge, and there are people who are locked out of that. I hear from people in developing nations where it's an incomprehensible amount of money for my session price. And someone who is making minimum wage, it may be quite a stretch to save up for a soul retrieval. And so one of the reasons that I'm committed to the podcast is giving all my best wisdom and information and support that can be conveyed to empower you without my personally doing direct energetic interventions on your part, to help people to be able, regardless of economic situation, ideally to have the support that I can offer while still balancing and honoring what works really well for me in terms of sustainability. I've been in practice for 21 years now and finally don't have stress and tension around money at a practical level. Doesn't mean my head doesn't get loud sometimes, but for a lot of those years I had credit card debt that kept going up and a lot of concerns and a lot of background stress. I wasn't very good at the entrepreneurship side of offering these gifts. I was far more talented at the work than I was at how to run a business really well. And so it took me a while to dial that in. And as such, I've spent a lot of time on the side of really longing for something and having a lot of fear about committing the money. And so I can really relate to being drawn to a workshop or a one-on-one session, and the money was there, but it might have ended up on a credit card. And the nuance of balancing that is really complicated. So if you're sitting in that place of, I'm really trying to figure out a way to manage a very tight budget, and a longing for some really good quality discerning support. I want to talk a little bit more about some thoughts on that. And I also want to talk for people who are listening who might be in the role of being a holistic practitioner or a coach and moving into this kind of work, because there's a complexity to how you price your services and whether you hold the boundaries, because I get a lot of requests for dropping my rates. That's a real regular email that I get, and I'd like to talk about the pros and cons of that. As I was bumbling my way through the very rich metaphysical community of San Diego in the 90s and learning and studying and having individual sessions and figuring out what I wanted to do and all of that, I had the opportunity to work with practitioners who were very clear and very clean with money. They represented it well, and I had people where they asked me for more money at the end of the session, and it was shocking and startling, and didn't feel good to me. And there was a lot of sort of clarification, because we're all human and messy, and I feel like as a practitioner, getting really clean and clear about money is really important. And it's just good to know that you'll be working with an enormous array of people, and it's really common for humans to have stuff about money. It's one of the major relationship tensions, is differences about how money is spent. And there's just a lot of complexity here, a lot of odd messages, a lot of things to unpack. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, because if you're someone really on either side of the equation looking for a practitioner, it's really good to have somebody who's in integrity and clarity about money, and that's a good thing to have discernment about. And if you're someone who's in business for yourself, then getting really clear about these things is going to save you a lot of grief, because you can stand in your center even when you get a wide variety of different responses. So that's a really long preface, I think, to what I want to talk about, but I want to start with the place that I remember sitting in when I was in college and when I was in my 20s and before I'd really kind of gotten rolling with my practice, and even after, which was something inside my soul knew that I could be so much healthier. And it wasn't that I came from a terrible trauma background, but I was incredibly energetically sensitive, which meant my social skill development was really behind par. I was desperately lonely, had a huge longing to connect, was unskillful at it. So some of the people that were the healthiest, who I would have most enjoyed, kind of backed away because of the price of admission of dealing with my unskillfulness and my reactivity and some of the challenges. And I just had this burning desire in my heart to find the tools, because some part of me, from 18 on just knew that it could be better. And so I was seeing counselors, and I was taking workshops, and I was doing inner work, and I was doing practices, and there was a lot of bumbling around. Some of the teachers I found were really high quality. One of the most memorable tensions around not having money and really, really wanting the work was when I moved in my couch surfing, mentally ill, very, very chaotic, extremely entitled first Reiki teacher who thought she was precious and special and shouldn't have to work. And I didn't have the money to pay this person who wasn't able to pay rent what felt to me like exorbitant rates that she was asking. It was a lot of money for me, but gosh, I could provide her with a place to live. I had a house with an extra bedroom. Surely then I would be special and important and get her attention. And really, that wasn't what happened. It wasn't like, oh, let me give you some Reiki treatments to make up for this generous thing where, you've provided your house. She was very, very, very much about just being a mess, again, very, very ill, but also, very, very entitled, not someone who felt like she should help out around the house or have an energy exchange. And so, it was a really good lesson for me. I don't want to make her bad and wrong. She was just doing her, and she was really good at it, which was nice, because I didn't have to kick her out because she found someone else to take her in about the time that she'd worn out her welcome, in a serious way with me and my partner at the time. So he and I didn't have the awkwardness of like giving her notice or driving her down to, a homeless shelter or anything. But for me, there was a way that I had tried to get something I desperately wanted, but was dealing with a constraint of having a lot of fear about spending money. And so what I want to offer is, in working out the congruent choice of what you commit your money to, you really need to work with making friends between your crown chakra, your soul vision of what you want your life to be, your third eye, your deep discernment, your ability to really tune into something, and use your center to find out if it's the right thing. Because I see some people who I do not think are particularly skillful or talented, but are incredibly good at the hit a pain point and offer credibility that they could get results in this area. And sometimes they can. I don't want to, pick on anyone, but there's some really, really, really expensive programs that I don't think are necessarily better than what's out there, but the copy is well written, the marketing is a beautiful presentation, and the longing for the thing kind of pulls someone off their center. So if you go through my website, I think I have a couple of testimonials way down somewhere, but I don't put testimonials up for the most part because my desire is just to let people feel into me, watch my videos, listen to my words, read what I've written, take everything that's of value that I'm offering freely, and then you should be able to see me clearly and know me. And I'm hoping that my would-be clients will go inside and feel into whether I'm the right match and make a decision that, even if it feels a little scary financially, is coming from this empowered place, is accessing their intuition. And I think this is such an important thing for navigating money in general, because sometimes it can be hard to differentiate between what is it you really want. Like, there's this woman who I absolutely adore. She wrote this book called A Happier Hour. Bex Weller, I think is her last name. But she has this beautiful women's sobriety program called Sexy Sobriety. Super affordable, incredibly good, really, really genuinely done the work of being incredibly addicted to alcohol and getting free of it. And she talks in a very focused, articulate way about when she was getting sober, saying to her partner, "I want a drink," and him asking her, "What do you really want?" And maybe what she wanted was fun or connection, or for the loudness in her head to be quiet, but going into that deeper, what is it I really want when I think I want this thing? Because the mechanism of capitalism, I'm pro-capitalism, by the way. I like the system of capitalism, but much like many things, I think that how capitalism operates in our lives needs adult supervision. That thing about have capitalism be the servant and not the master is really important, because marketing is incredibly skillful at producing a neurological response. I'm a layperson on the subject, but I'm geeky about neuroscience because I think it's so darn interesting. And I'm really aware of how Facebook, for example, hacks my connection circuitry. So I get these little social connection rewards, but then it's hollow because it's just a chemistry release. It's not the same as sitting down for brunch with someone that I genuinely love and hearing about what's up for them and what's important, and sharing what matters to me. And so when it comes to a large purchase, being able to go in and say, is this something that's been stimulated in the chemistry response of my brain? Because your brain will tell you want sugar food, and it will tell you 10 times louder that, high salt, high carb, high sugar, high processed fat food is what you want more than anything. And the more your instincts are activated, the louder that voice will be. And it's not what we know is nurturing for our body, but we just didn't have those foods when instincts that would not have led us astray as hunter-gatherer people get kicked up in relationship to what's available in the modern world. And so the craving for a donut that feels really loud, that's creating tension in your body by not eating the donut, we come by that honestly, because if you're in stress state and there's unclaimed food and you're a human with insecure access to food, it's a good idea to calorie load a little bit if you're going to need to run away or fight or deal with difficult situations. But for modern humans with, donuts were never actually a thing. It's okay. I'm not saying never eat a donut, but if you eat all the donuts all the time, there are going to be some downsides for that. It's not that balanced. And being able to spot that chemistry inside of you that's the longing for something that's more of a neuroscience kind of thing, because marketing is going to push your buttons for longing for connection, longing for safety, longing for, perceived social value is very woven into capitalism, and it doesn't make people happy when you really break it down. If you're curious about what makes you happy, there's a fun program. It's called the Science of Well-Being, and it's a professor at Yale who did real research on what makes people happy actually, and how bad we are about what we think would make us happy. So when we're choosing to commit resources that are a stretch for us, we don't want to be in that kind of miswanting where we have this magical thinking that somehow a healing session is going to solve all of our problems, because it will move the dial. It can move your life toward an upward spiral. I cover a lot of ground in the work that I do, but it's not a magic bullet. There's a journey, there's inner work, there are layers as we go along. And being able to differentiate between your soul really saying, this is an opportunity that has value for me. This is a destiny path changer. This is something that is going to move me in a direction that is powerful. So how can I get resourceful and figure out how to draw in the resources really specifically for this? And people are immensely resourceful when we put our minds to it, when we get out of those grooves of habitual thinking. Now, it takes a lot of energy to be resourceful. It's a silly example, but there are some travel dreams I have that would be more elegant if I could afford a little more money. And so I'm thinking about, all right, what could I do to generate a little bit of extra revenue? But that's a complicated question, because if I'm working more hours, that takes away from downtime, and I have this real balanced system. So I need to be really careful. It's not a lifestyle to be coming up with more money than naturally is flowing. And we have that ability to manifest something. There are many, many, many ways we could go about that. And it can also take a lot of energy if we need to, step up a manifestation. So that's where we don't want to end up in a shopping addiction or indulging whims or indulging chemistry. But we want to be able to really hear our soul wisdom that says, this is aligned for you. This is the right thing to really bring into your world. And one of the biggest pieces of work that I do with people is having all of our parts playing for the same team. So if our soul desires are not run through the budget management of our sense of money, we can end up with some really challenging outcomes. I knew one really beautiful woman with a lot of healer's gifts, gorgeous spirit, who ended up living in her car because she imagined spirit would provide if she just quit her corporate job and started offering the admittedly really beautiful work, but she had no effective system. And I'm not sure she was overly fussed about living in her car, so, all good. It was part of her journey, but I was with her when she was making the decisions, and the notion that spirit will provide, I think, is more based on different systems that we had for offering gifts in other lifetimes that aren't necessarily the structure of the modern first world for most of us. And at the same time, you don't want a budget person, in your root chakra who's bullying everything else, who's making money so important. There are people who live in poverty and die with huge amounts of money in the bank. And there's an aspect of our instincts that never feels like there's enough money. So if the fight or flight is activated, it's going to be too loud to hear your soul self, and it's going to be really scary to spend money because no matter how much you have, it never feels like enough. So there are people who are genuinely working with, I am not going to have enough money to pay the rent, and that is one aspect, and that's an important at the level of fact. And there are others of us where there's actually a fair bit of money in play, but it's not unlimited. So we need to make discerning, careful choices about how we work with it. And the invitation is just whatever your process is. Maybe you journal all your thoughts and feelings so you can tease out, is my root chakra trying to be over controlling and make my whole life about, holding on to money really hard? Because I certainly had that. I had that going on, a lot of tension around money. Is my brain chemistry just wanting the rewards, the serotonin of buying something? We get a biological reward, and lots of people blow through a lot of money by buying lots of little tiny things because they get the reward, but then they don't necessarily have the resources for the things that really matter. Or am I being not a responsible adult in my life because I'm in service to this bigger vision and I haven't run it through the practical discernment of the world I live in? And it's not that people can't manifest amazing things, but if you're doing it in a way that is supported by the structure of the world, it goes a lot better. So my being really good friends with the internet, for example, has made it a lot easier to offer my work. It's something that I'm a child of the computer era. My father worked for Hewlett Packard. We had the old DOS-based systems really early on. So my ability to use the tool that is a computer helps me to be able to really effectively make enough money. So this is a piece to really work with if you're sitting on that tension of, there's a part of me screaming I can't afford it, there's a part of me screaming I really, really want it, and they're at war with each other. And this happens in a lot of areas. We could be at war with productivity versus rest, and if the pendulum swings too far out of balance, it's not good. And again, if you're triaging a severe financial circumstance, this doesn't apply. This is, if you need to scramble to make rent so you and your child aren't homeless, that is a completely different conversation. This is for people who have fundamental security, limited resources, possibly some concerns about having enough money in the future, who are balancing the spending choices that they make along the way. That's where this, how do I get these different parts of me? How do I tease out whether this is a neurological reaction to reward chemistry, whether this is I'm using my deep soul discernment, whether I'm listening to marketing material and I have another longing, whether it truly is an integrity, I can manage this with my budget. And, at a starting point, just some good journaling where you let all those parts have their say, like really be expressed with all their fears and longings and hopes. And then ideally you can use your inner wise person as a benevolent CEO, much like someone running a company who's like, marketing says this and engineering says this and human resources says this. And then you take all the input and are like, all right, here's how we balance all of these needs. And no part is going to get it all its way, but they're worked with. I work with my biochemistry all the time. I'll check off petty tasks on lists because, that gives a chemistry reward. Like I've done something, and it's easier on my budget than jumping on Amazon Prime and buying something I don't really need for a similar reward. So I'm all about, understanding my brain and working with it. I just want to make sure that the movement and the trajectory and the destiny path are not pulled out of whack by the desire for reward chemistry. So moving along to some advice for practitioners or entrepreneurs and even people who are working with those people if you really want to up your game. One of the requests, like I said, is I get a lot of requests to lower my rates. And if nothing else, if you're someone who's listened to this and you don't ask me that question, it would be much appreciated. On the frequently asked questions page, I talk about the fact that I've put a lot of thought into my rates. I have this whole nuanced system that is about the lowest I can possibly charge to provide the most value that still provides sustainability, so I'm not working an unsustainable number of hours. I worked a lot of nights and weekends developing my business, and I don't want to do that. I don't want that to be my long-term lifestyle, and I want to have the resources. I pay for this podcast, I pay for the hosting, I pay for the sound editing. It's money out of pocket. So I have thought about how can I be of the most service to the most people, and I don't love it when someone asks for a discount, and I'm really, really clear that I'm not available for that, so it's not something that will be successful. Now, At other times in my practice, I had more flexibility around that, although very, very seldom did I agree to discount that. I had much lower rates. They weren't particularly sustainable, but I seldom gave discounts. Even then, it just didn't feel good to me. And again, this is a different question depending on your circumstance. So if you absolutely in an emergency situation need to make rent or pay a grocery bill and someone shows up and offers you not your long-term sustainable rate, but some much needed cash influx, that's a really different thing. But the situation I was in for many years of my business was my credit card debt was in an upward spiral. I was owing more and more and more as time went by. I was super stressed about that. I couldn't seem to get ahead of that. I'm very happy to report at this point I am debt-free. I don't owe anything. There's probably a small rolling balance on my credit cards, but that's just because Amazon gives me 5% back, but I'm able to pay that off every month. So there's a really different relationship that I have now. And a lot of that had to do with getting really strategic about my business and really figuring out all the nuts and bolts. Like I wasn't giving myself vacation time. It was stressful if I got sick because that was unpaid time off. And there was a real struggle hustle element. And I almost feel at loose ends because I'm not in that situation. I can afford to be with some of the more subtle, nuanced kind of things. And I have an infinite number of things I want to create, but I don't need to create them in order to have money work out for myself, which is a really, really different experience. So what I would offer as a person who maybe wants to offer your services and is new to this, it was a real game changer for me when I gave myself permission not to be the person most aligned to provide services for someone making minimum wage. And I so feel for those people and I so want things to shift and change, but for what I need to make and for what it costs them, they're just not my sweet spot. I do better with people who, have done some inner work, have laid a foundation. I don't like to work with people in crisis as much, and I will do it. There are some amazing people who are in a really, really tough place, and, they really have the clear vision of getting help, and I'm down for that. And there's more ability to absorb the work if you have your executive brain online when you're talking to me, if you aren't panicked in the fight or flight, if you're not dissociating. So I work with a huge range of people in terms of mental health and functionality and financial circumstances, but I don't work with people that are asking for a discount. And part of that is, if I could go back and talk to my younger self, I would have gotten some more business training and worked at implementing it so that the slow times without sessions, I was either being paid well for my session work or I was doing things that were going to fill the channel, because I book 100% of my sessions now. I don't know the last time I was like, I'd really like to work with someone today, and no one booked that slot, and it's just not a part of my practice. And there was a lot of figuring out how to, do a website where I explained things clearly enough that someone could understand whether it was a match for them or not. There's a lot that goes into that. But during the times when I was working an unsustainable amount of sessions and not making enough money, it wasn't a very good equation. So the downside as a practice, if you haven't priced your rates at a sustainable enough place, is that you take away from being able to do business infrastructure things that will grow your practice to potentially a better place. And again, it's not a hard and fast rule, but what I find is that people who are most desperate for money, who tell me the most pitiful, devastating, miserable, awful, oh my goodness, no one would ever want to live through that stories, I have a lot of compassion for them, but I'm going to end up having to work really, really hard if I'm dealing with an unemotionally regulated, frantic, desperate person who's struggling with entities and lack of home security, lack of a place to live potentially, and all of that. So there's a certain amount that whoever's just asked for a discount, I'm probably going to have to work a lot harder. There's probably going to be a need for more services, so they're probably going to want to write me more emails. They're going to want to have a longer conversation before they book. They're more likely to ask just one little question between session time, so I'll spend more time gently enforcing boundaries, which is, no, if you want to talk to me, let's get on a call. And so there's just a lot more overhead and complexity that I could then be paid less for. And I prefer, honestly, to have different clients. And the next thing I'm going to say varies, because I've definitely had clients who are in dire circumstances, and it was kind of like the person bleeding in the street, worried that they're upsetting people who are seeing blood, or, disturbing or bothering people, and there's certainly clients who are just so hypersensitive to anything they might do that would adversely impact me, even when they're in a really difficult situation. They're so careful not to give offense and to be sensitive and to discern any boundary, the slightest indication of a boundary, and they're gonna, work so hard to be around it. So I want to acknowledge that, but at the same time, there's also a demographic of people who are really desperate and struggling, and it's kind of like they train lifeguards. If someone is drowning, be aware that they could pull you down with them, trying to get out of the water, not because they're bad people, not because they're evil or awful, but just because they're desperate. And so someone who's really desperate and under-resourced and struggling and really feels like they need the work but doesn't feel like they have the money and is trying to work that out by saying, please, please, please work with me at a discount, that individual may be much more oblivious to the impact on me. They may push boundaries, and I get it. Like, I've been a person who pushed boundaries. There were times when I was just so dug in with my idea of how things should be, it didn't occur to me that another person would have a different opinion, would not be available for that. Of course, my way is the way that it should go. I spent a lot of time doing Byron Katie work to dismantle that, because it was really messing up my results with other people. I've really cultivated a capacity to endeavor to understand what other people are coming from and what I need, and really work from the win-win or no deal. And, again, that's a luxury that I've had the opportunity to have in my life. And, without making the person wrong or bad, if somebody's just really, really hungry for something, they may be really oblivious to how they impact someone, how their requests go, because I'm quite confident that the person who's writing me to ask, pretty please, could you give me a discount, doesn't understand that I don't get paid if I don't work. So I have to build in all my sick time and all my vacation time. And they probably don't understand that as a self-employed person, I'm paying double on Social Security because normally my employer would cover it. And they don't understand that there's a seasonal rise and fall that I have to account for. And they don't understand that there are a ton of hours that go in behind maintaining my website, paying my website for the person for the complicated stuff. There's the business development, there's creating new content, there's the hours that I spend creating podcasts. They don't understand all the money that I'm spending for the infrastructure that allows them to receive services and the impact on my life. It has not crossed their mind that, maybe I would have more of a struggle if I say yes to their request. And I get it that they're just aware of, I'm struggling and it's hard and I feel like I'm drowning, and I came across your work and I feel like it's a way out, but the amount of money is unattainable. I get that. I get that they're just in looking for what they need, and I understand that, and I have compassion for it. And I don't love working with people who are so caught up in what they need that they have nothing left over to see the impact of their behavior on someone else. And again, this is not solely a basis of circumstances. There are people in fantastic circumstances who it just hasn't occurred to them that they should think about the impact of their behavior. They're really oblivious to it. So I know people who are incredibly wealthy who are really oblivious to the impact of their actions and their behaviors, and people who are really in struggle who are just hypersensitive, incredibly aware of how they might impact someone else. There's a lot of variation. But there is a certain correlation, the Venn diagram of people who are just about what they want and need and not aware of how they might impact someone else, and under-resourced financially. There's some overlap in the Venn diagram of those two circles. And it's just something to really be aware of. If you're a person who's looking for support, you'll have a lot more happiness and generosity if you're having some discernment about how your requests affect people and put some thought into the win-win. How can I ask for something in a way that they'd be most likely to be a yes to, that wouldn't be too onerous, and to be really available to hear the feedback of whether they're a yes or a no to that. Because I've had people where I gave them a soft no to a request, and then they escalated to a more direct, hey, I'd really like a discount. And I'm like, well, if you were listening to the nuance of what I said, I don't think you would have followed through with this request. And so if you're in that place and you're wanting to have people more willing to go out of their way to help you, it's a good quality to cultivate. If you're somebody who's oversensitive to that, you're allowed to be healthy selfish. You're allowed to just really take care of you. If you're the one bleeding on the street and no one else is bleeding on the street, everybody else could take care of their own concerns about seeing someone bleeding on the street. You may authentically need to be home with yourself. And as a practitioner, I think it's really easy to overgive. Our archetypes of the healer want to help absolutely everything. It pulls at our heart cords. And that archetype of the healer was something I really had to provide with adult supervision to not have upward spiraling credit card debt, because I would always rather answer the unpaid email and geek out with someone who is a client or a friend for whom I have an affinity. I spend a lot of unpaid time being the kitchen table counselor to friends, and, giving away time to clients that I really cared about. And I wasn't working on infrastructure. And the truth of it is, I like healing work a lot more than I like updating my mailing list. I just do. And so I was neglecting doing the things that would keep my business solvent for the affinity. And, one of the things I like is Stephen Covey's quadrants. He's saying things have a spectrum for how important or not important they are, and how urgent or not urgent they are. And he says in life we often neglect the important but not urgent, which, if you're an entrepreneur, figuring out how people can find your website is not urgent. You don't have to do it right now. It's not like the phone ringing or the email in your inbox, but it's very important. And the urgent but not important might be the email that someone says where they want to, just joyfully share a journey that they had, which is super cool if you've built into a program that you're, going to be paid to witness people's journeys and provide feedback. I love doing that work. It's super fun. But if it's unpaid work and it means you don't over time work on the other things, you kind of need to ideally put yourself on a budget. Now, again, this may not apply to everyone. There are people who are coming to this as a second career. They've made the money they need to make. They're in retirement. They have flexibility. And there are people who provide beautiful work to very financially under-resourced people at very affordable amounts. So this isn't a map for everyone, but I know a lot of people where this is their livelihood. They don't have another source of income, and they need to have this work, and their quality of life is going to be a lot better if they shore up their boundary that says, I can't help everyone, so let's go for the alignment. And even if you don't have enough clients, collapsing your boundaries is something to just do with a lot of discernment, because again, super early in my journey, I had some really mentally ill people who didn't have any money, who I just gave and gave and gave to, and I was getting the text messages in the middle of the night because they were being psychically attacked and all the hysteria, and I got really sucked into that, and I admit it freely. On this whole subject, I feel like this is a good place to confess that, Katie in her 20s is somebody that I probably would have turned away as a client, because I would not have enjoyed my tension and stress and worry about money. And I really wasn't right with being able to balance my soul vision for what was alive and aligned for me with my fears about not having enough money. I hadn't done that work, so it made me really controlling. There's a spaciousness that's nice when someone isn't stressed about the money they're spending. And so I just want to offer all of this. It's, again, a complicated kind of topic. And, there's such a range. And If you're feeling like, oh, I have some money stuff, welcome to the club. I've done a lot of really focused work on my own money stuff so I can be really clear so that then I can work with people in a clear way and not work with people if their lack of clarity about money is going to make it really hard to be in a business relationship with them. And I just want to offer this because, it's some of that, like if I could go back and talk to early entrepreneur Katie and I'd known some of the things that I know now, I would have saved myself some grief, and again, it's not that I wouldn't have had to work some of this stuff out like adult supervision for the archetype of the healer, but when I came up with the problem of that, I think I would have noticed it a lot sooner than I did on my own. So I hope this is helpful and supportive. I hope that if you're someone who's looking for support, you'll consider not asking practitioners for discounts, and the people who in some ways are the most generous, may struggle the most, or at least think about all the things that go into maintaining a business. It's complicated, and again, I'm not going to tell you can't ask for discounts. Please don't ask me for discounts on my one-on-one services. I don't do sales, so if you're waiting for a sale, that's not going to happen. If anything, my one-on-one rates will probably go up over time. But again, I want to support you. We don't have to have a money exchange. I just don't want people to take time and not give me money for it is kind of the gist of it. So if they're writing big complicated emails that they want me to read, that I have an issue with that if they're not paying me for my time. Whereas, if they're just listening to my podcasts and soaking up value and never give me a dime, I'm thrilled with that energy exchange because I'm like, yes, take what is valuable for you. I want you to thrive in the world. I would love to have that outcome. So in terms of navigating that, again, this is a super personalized kind of thing. But I just want to offer that because I think even if whatever side of the equation you're on, whether you're short on money and your soul is really calling for some quality support and facilitation, or you're a new practitioner, or you're an experienced practitioner, or the same conversation is coming up about a piece of art that you're in love with, but really can't justify paying the price. Like doing some inner work on this, I believe, is just going to make energy exchanges a lot more user-friendly for not damaging and hurting relationships. Because the notion that it doesn't hurt to ask, well, it kind of does. I lose affinity for someone if they've asked me for a discount, even if they decide to work with me later. And that's just the truth of it. It's not that I won't work with them. It's not that I won't have a ton of compassion, but there's a piece of the joy where feeling that someone's coming in not being happy with the energy exchange, like that icky feeling when you're like, I don't like what this costs, but I'm paying it anyway. If you had like your DMV registration go way up in a given year, you're like, oh, I definitely want my car registered, so I'm going to pay it, but I'm super annoyed at what this costs. There are these moments where that's just not a good feeling. There's a contraction in being in argument with yourself. And I really like the alignment of being able to choose. And I get that there's inner work that it takes to get there with money, but there's a lot of value in that. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.